Hello everyone, Bill Parish here from GTT Audio, and welcome to the channel today. Well, we're back with Vivid Audio co-founder, lead designer, Laurence Dickie, and probably 100 other titles and names.
That will do just fine.
Okay. And we have Maurice Jeffries from Positive Feedback. Welcome, Maurice.
Welcome, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Maurice was on the channel a couple of years ago when we launched the Kronos Discovery.
Indeed.
Yes, and that was
quite an experience.
That was the last time you were here, and now we
3 years later.
3 years later, invited you in, and a lot's changed here at GTT.
But the Discovery is still there. I'm glad to see that you haven't replaced it with, let's say, a Reiko or a Lin.
No. It is still there. We've added the new tone arm. I think you know all about those tone arms.
And much to learn, and I will hear more about the tone arms in the weeks to come.
Well, I mean, you have one.
I do. I have the Chronoscope RS, and it's a lovely, lovely device.
Yes. Yeah.
And yes, Louis, the review is coming. Cancel the hit.
So, Maurice, we wanted to have you in and show you the new statement speaker of Lawrence's.
The magnificent Moya.
The magnificent Moya. Yes, that's a great term.
Well, it's so visually impressive. It's just under 6 feet tall, maybe a little bit more. It's wide versus a narrow baffle design, but beautifully contoured to control diffraction. It's twice as deep as it is wide, and so it's and yet when you approach it and you touch the cabinet and you walk around, everything is beautifully executed. Everything appears to follow and meet a specific technical functional need. But it's also very aesthetically beautifully put together.
It is. I mean, sometimes the pictures and even the videos don't quite capture that. But you said
it's monolithic, but it's also beautiful and sexy. But there's nothing out there. I think it's
the paint color or the paint finishes that video can't capture. And when you see it with the way the light hits it, and you see all the different dimensions, and
it does make a statement. So viewers, the next time they have a chance to see the product in their local audio show or at a dealer, they really should, because it really is a statement product.
There is something about complex curved surfaces which does make it difficult to understand the final three-dimensional shape without actually seeing it and walking around it. A 2D photograph doesn't really do justice. And the number of people that will come into a room at a show and say, oh, it's bigger, smaller, smoother, all sorts of things, than I had read from the photographs they'd seen. So, yeah, I agree. Well, Try and see them in the flesh.
I have 100% feedback that says it looks better in person than it does in pictures. So,
Well, and it sounds amazing. The first thing that struck me, aside from the sheer extension from 40 or 50 kilohertz down to well below 20 hertz, and Laurence, you and I and Bill had this conversation the other day. We were listening to a piece of maybe chamber music or maybe a solo piano, very intimately recorded piece. And it's almost as if the larger woofers disappeared and you were left with an 800-pound mini monitor, but with the projection powers of a full-range speaker. And if I'm not mistaken, if I did my count right, per speaker there are 13 drivers, 8 of the massive woofers, and then the 5 front drivers, the tweeter, the super tweeter or the mid tweeter, and then the I guess is that mid range? Is it technically a cone or an inverted dome?
The central 100 millimeter, we call that the mid. The 50 millimeter we call the upper mid, and then the tweeter. And then below you have the 2 lower mids, and finally the bass.
The bass drivers, absolutely. And because they're all essentially formed of the same composite, you don't have any problems with, let's say, a beryllium tweeter and a Kevlar mid-range and a ceramic bass driver. No, there is no material discontinuity.
Yeah, that's right. I've used the term consistency of philosophy or continuity of philosophy, i.e. Each driver uses the same material, the same alloy, more or less. With the upper drivers these days, we had a little carbon sparkle. But fundamentally, these are 5056 magnesium aluminium alloy and the magnet systems, the voice coil materials, there is consistency. And the loading, of course, each range is more or less the same but scaled appropriately. And there is that continuity throughout the range. So indeed, the opposite, as you mentioned, when you might have a flexible cone material for one, a very hard dome material for another, I think that helps cause discontinuity between ranges. So yeah, I absolutely agree there.
Well, I've got a couple of questions that I'm curious about, and I think that our viewers would be curious about also. First, the name Moya, and what does it denote? And then second, how does the design and the specific design choices that you've made impact the speaker's overall sonics?
Right, you're the first person that's asked me about the name. And indeed, I've been very bad at offering an explanation. Moya is Zulu for air or spirit. And all our recent products have been given Zulu names. There was Gear at the beginning, which is a dance. Kaya, which is home, and they were appropriate to the nature of the product. And finding a name for this new flagship of our range was actually really quite challenging. But Moya absolutely fits the bill. Of course, it's another four-letter word ending in ya, and spirit and air. How appropriate could you get?
And there is a spirit, the Gaia spirit
of course,
product.
Yes.
So there's that linear sibling connection also.
Being
Fascinating.
being absolutely not a Zulu speaker, I'm afraid. When we called it a spirit, I had no idea at the time that the Zulu word would be Moya.
Well, clearly that cultural and cross-cultural references is helped inspire how you think about and name products. What are some of the, maybe as an aside footnote question, what are some of the challenges and benefits of having the headquarters of the company based in South Africa in Durban?
Right, in Durban. Well, and the reason we're there is that Philip was resident at the time when he first made contact with me. Well, the Zulus are a really lovely people. They are really emotionally expressive. They love to sing and dance. And our workforce are 90% Zulu, and they're really dedicated to their work and to the company. They're a great team to have.
So this is an international product in ways that the average listener may not fully appreciate. I tend to think that understanding that genesis, that DNA is really important, and understanding the product itself. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say Durban itself is a very cosmopolitan city. There are Indians, Chinese, Zulus, of course, and the Europeans. It's a great place.
A lot of wonderful South African wines drunk in the factory after.
Well, perhaps amongst the office staff. Yeah.
There's the speaker itself and its massive footprint. Why the massive footprint? The wide baffle choice. The depth of the speaker, which strikes me as roughly almost twice as deep as the front baffle.
Yeah, I think they're 22 inches wide, and they are about 48 inches deep.
Yeah,
so that gives you a sense of the size of the speaker. Yeah. I mean, it's massive, and they each weigh about 350 kilos, about 800 pounds each.
That's right. Yeah, that's the complete assembly. Moya is modular.
It's 5 pieces.
So you've got 4 bass
6,
chambers.
Actually.
If you include the plinth, absolutely. It is something that perhaps it actually came without really being a conscious thought, this modularity. But when we were building the prototypes, I wanted to have the freedom to be able to adjust the setup. So having separate bass chambers to be able to do experiments was just the logical way of implementing that. But it just moved on naturally. It just evolved from that prototype, which was a wooden case, to the fiberglass manifestation that we have, or carbon manifestation that we have today. But the modularity, perhaps that's also something that comes from the professional field, in which I have, quite some experience. It's absolutely natural in the pro audio field that you have a modular sound system because, there's flexibility as well as portability. So when it came to Moya, it was just utterly natural. One of the consequences is, of course, that each individual element is manageable by 2 people just, and it means you can get it up a stairway or that sort of thing. So it makes it a much more accessible system.
Well, that's for sure. Thank you, Laurence. If it were 800 pounds and not modular,
well, the funny thing is, it's a massive.
It's no wonder everyone in the audio or Everyone thinks audio's a white collar job. It's a blue collar job.
Yeah, when it comes to moving 800 pounds is
and everybody in audio I know has had to have some sort of surgery or another. Whether
Yeah,
it's
oh, my
spine or
back.
neck
I seem
or
to recall giving
hernia.
you.
Yeah.
I seem to recall giving you a hard time by not explaining to me just how massive the AudioNet Humboldt integrated amplifier was that I reviewed a couple of years back, and of course many of our viewers don't know that I struggled and actually opened and inserted the amplifier backwards because I didn't understand and so that just doubled the workload. I'm glad it returned to you safely and in one piece without any scratches because it's a beast. It was a beast. Why not an all aluminum closure? I mean, though Magico and other manufacturers,
Right.
spend volumes explaining the benefits of aluminum enclosures and their ability to damp out resonant behavior. And
Right. Look, there's absolutely no question, and I'm not for 1 minute diminishing the ultimate performance of solid aluminium enclosure. But of course, it does result in an extremely heavy final result. Now, at Vivid Audio, because we use this reaction cancelling arrangement for our bass units, which we'll come back to, I think, in a little while, it means that the enclosure, the bass enclosure I'm talking about here, is there simply to contain the pressure of the rearward wave. It doesn't need mass to do that. In fact, we want as low a mass as possible. We want the enclosure to be stiff so that it contains that pressure without moving, but we want to be sure that the resonant modes are as far out of band as possible, so we have stiff but light materials. Now, actually, aluminium in a sandwich, of course, is a perfectly acceptable material in that respect. We use fibre-skinned, lightweight cord, vacuum-infused composites to do the job for us, and it results in a cabinet that's, well, actually the Moya enclosure, the actual enclosure itself is about 30 kilos. The bass drivers themselves are another 30 kilos. But the enclosure, even though the total assembly is a little bit heavy, half of that is the bass drivers themselves.
Amazing.
We don't need what some would call seismic mass. Normally, you have to have a heavy cabinet so that it doesn't jump around in reaction to the movement of the cones.
Do the opposing bass drivers that they cancel each other out in a sense? So you don't have to worry about a jumping lively cabinet. I mean,
That's right.
when we were playing bass-rich music and organ music the other day, I walked around and touched the cabinet, and it was as still as a tune, which was I think the anticipated and expected designed objective.
Well, of course, it's been a theme throughout Vivid Audio's products, and indeed it harks back to work that I did before, is my belief in the importance of decoupling the drivers from the enclosure. I've actually brought along a little demo to show you this thing. Bill, do you have that?
I do here.
Oh, right. Oh, well, there's a thing. What, no drinks? Okay, look.
I brought the props.
So we've got here a beautiful bamboo tray, and I'm going to use this to demonstrate the importance of decoupling. First of all, let's go back one step. So when a cone moves forward in a loudspeaker, the force that moved that cone forward is reflected in an equal and opposite manner on the magnet. The magnet was just attached to the chassis, and on its own, the actual sound radiation from that magnet is very small because, of course, it's about 100 times the mass of the cone. The problem comes when we attach the magnet to an enclosure. So here I've got a little music box. On its own, the sound is virtually inaudible. When I attach it to a sounding board,
It's lovely, but exactly not what you want to have
exactly
in a
not what you want.
loudspeaker.
Because the problem is not just the fact that now it's actually creating an audible sound, but the resonances of the sounding board will now be superimposed on that sound, and they will now poke their heads above the actual direct frequency sound output of the front of the driver. Now, the solution is really very, very simple and straightforward. I have here a silicone O-ring. It's a soft 30 Shaw O-ring. Now, if I just put that under the music box, you see we're back to virtually having it isolated. And again, direct connection.
No loudspeaker or microphone. Simply resonant behavior.
There you go.
That's phenomenal.
So all Vivid Audio drivers are suspended on silicone O-rings. We have O-rings between the magnet and the exponential horn, between the horn and the enclosure, and between the magnet and the enclosure.
And everyone else's drivers are bolted right to the...
Well, that was going to raise my second
Yeah.
question. That brings me to my second question, or maybe third. That reference to suspension and suspended as a decoupling strategy, because we've all been told as audiophiles that you need to get your torque wrenches out, your little Allen wrench set out, and once in a while tighten those drivers so they're as rigidly affixed to the cabinet as possible. In fact, our friend Louis Desjardins up in Montreal is obsessive about making sure that drivers are as rigidly affixed to the cabinet with his Wilsons. I'm not sure if he has new speakers now.
Well,
you have a slightly different approach.
it is a different approach. Of course, if your cabinet is very massive and very inert, then it's much less of an issue. But the majority of wooden enclosures are not that massive and inert, and they do act as sounding boards, or damped. Actually, damped is the other factor you have to bring in here. I think there's this belief that in order for the motion bestowed upon the cone to be accurate, that the magnet must be very, very stationary, very stable. I would disagree with that, because the point is that the motion of the magnet is actually completely predictable. It's a mass. It's subjected to a force, F equals ma. It will move by a small amount, but it's not a problem. The motion of the cone will not be dependent on the way in which the magnet is grounded, shall we say. And certainly, I believe it's more important to have the fully floating magnet than one that might be attached to, as we say,
The cabinet.
A cabinet with its own resonant and structural mode. So it's a different philosophy. I'm not saying, we're all different. So that's the mids and highs.
It's okay. You could say your philosophy's better.
Other manufacturers do all the time.
That's okay to promote yourself.
Yeah. So that's the mids and highs dealt with. Very simple solution.
Third question, or is this my fourth question? I did some listening extensively to the Moya yesterday and was impressed by the effortlessness with which it played, the extension in the bass and up high, the sweetness of the highs, the coherence. We had mentioned earlier that it voices on simpler fare like a mini monitor. But it also has a sound that I would call a more focused, direct sort of wavefront compared to is it Gia or Gaia?
Oh, we say Gia.
The Gia spirits up in the studio listening room that I heard this morning. And that radiation pattern you said was a 270-degree radiation pattern, which gives the sound a more holographic and almost surround sound kind of perspective. They're different philosophies to achieve different results.
There's no one correct answer in this.
And that's also a different space with a much more intimate.
Yes, it's a much more
acoustic.
intimate. Yes, it's more like a jazz club downstairs in the big room. The sound is like going
Carnegie
to your
Hall.
Yes, it's Carnegie. Absolutely, absolutely.
So, okay, the thing is that Gia with its narrow baffle does tend to have a broader sound dispersion, but that also means, therefore, that the acoustic of the room all the way around the loudspeaker becomes involved in the final result that you're getting. Whereas Moya, as you correctly point out, because of its wide baffle, tends to have a forward bias. It's a more monitorish sound. So there is a little bit more of the studio about it, more of perhaps a more accurate delivery, but we're only talking about the difference between the acoustic behind the loudspeaker. As far as the rest of it is concerned, the environment, the sidewalls, and the wall behind you, there is no difference between the two. But yes, there is it's a subtle difference, but it's definitely there.
Yes.
What we've found in the past, And again, I must be careful not to generalise and it's also terribly subjective and a matter of taste, but the broader the spread, the more appropriate it is to acoustically recorded music, whereas the more directional the pattern, the more it lends itself to reproduce sound, should we say, because of that intimacy. With a broader spread, it's a little bit more like the musicians are in the room. With a more monitorish quality, you're sort of hearing through into the mix.
Into the mix,
Yeah,
yes, absolutely. And that very much was the impression that I had. And we talked about that yesterday and a little bit more this morning. Absolutely. What was the biggest challenge of designing a speaker that retails in the U.S. for, is it, Bill, $425 or $450?
$465.
For $465. Obviously, you're not going to sell 70 or 80 pairs of speakers at that price a
I hope so.
year. You hope so, yeah.
Well, worldwide.
Yeah, maybe
and
worldwide,
the prices
yes.
are stabilized
Yes,
throughout the
yes,
world. I mean,
yes.
there's no country that's
This much,
yeah.
but this is a statement product, and it's not designed for everyone. Obviously, it has a very targeted base of purchasers that can afford the very best. And this is sort of new territory for you in that respect.
Sure.
So what were some of the challenges of dipping your toes in that particular stream?
Right, well, where do we start? The realisation that it was going to have to be a five-way, and the sort of, it made me pause to take stock. Designing crossovers, whilst I have it in print, I think that I quite enjoy designing passive crossovers with the modern computer-aided network analysis and optimization tools. It's actually very satisfying. And you can, with a good set of drivers properly mounted in good enclosures, which I believe we do, it actually becomes reasonably straightforward to do that task. But going from a four-way to a five-way, I could see this was going to represent quite a challenge. And indeed, whereas the traditional Linkwitz-Riley alignment, as it's known, which is all well and good if you're just talking about a simple two-way, as soon as you start to bring in a greater number of ways, the crossover points begin to interact. So actually delivering crossovers which sum perfectly becomes more and more of a challenge the more ways you have to the system. But nevertheless, as I say, it was a challenge. We did this back at the beginning of the year. It took me about a month. But at the end of it, I'm really pleased to be able to say that the summation at each crossover point is as near to perfect as I could hope. And I'm really very, very pleased with the result, with the homogeneity of the delivery, the seamlessness as you go through the spectrum. No, it was a challenge, but worthwhile, and I'm satisfied with where we got to.
There's a lot in the speaker that harkens back to your days at Bowers & Wilkins, the tapered loading of the drivers.
Yes, indeed.
So could you tell the audience a little bit about that? Because those features are still inherent in this speaker.
Well,
so
absolutely.
Just updated and refined, I would imagine.
Yeah, but you know, the interesting thing about the tapered tube is how simple it is in its implementation. It is just an exponentially tapered tube, very easy to make and to mould. The key is perhaps that you actually put a plug of stuffing inside it. That is rather crucial to its operation. Although technically possible, if you had a very, 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 very long tapered tube, the viscous losses in it would eventually do the job. But anyway, back on terra firma, a bit of fibre stuffing does the trick. Fundamentally, the idea hasn't changed since I stumbled upon it in those early days with Nautilus. Still a very effective way of dealing with the rear wave. I know that other manufacturers have since come up with alternative ways of absorbing that wave, and very effective they are too. But I'm very proud and pleased to be able to say that the exponential tube that we use on Vivid Audio products absolutely works. It's a very simple, foolproof, and tolerant technology. You don't have to be utterly precise in the tuning of something to go with something else. It just works.
One of the things that I noticed about, I'm sorry, Bill, were you going to ask
No,
questions?
no, it's
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed in listening to the Moya yesterday was that it can play beautifully and great linearity and air and ambiance played very softly on simple music, acoustically recorded music. When required to do so to play full blockbuster symphonies from whatever orchestra or conductor you care to mention, we listened to some Joanne Folletta. We listened to some Schulte with the Chicago, a whole range of orchestras. And the speaker just kept playing effortlessly. I recall having a conversation with our mutual friend Greg Weaver about listening to a pretty expensive product at an audio show recently in Florida, at the Florida International Audio Expo. And the speaker had a vicious impedance curve, and it dropped in the mid-bass region down to like 0.8 ohms. It was brutal.
That's harsh.
And I listened to that speaker, and then a speaker from the same manufacturer that was far easier to drive, and I thought that the far easier to drive and much more inexpensive speaker actually sounded a little bit more dynamically composed. And your speaker didn't strike me, and I don't know the full impedance plot, but it struck me as a relatively straightforward load for a competently designed solid state or even quality tube amplifier. Tell us a little bit about that and the thinking.
Yeah, well, one of the delightful benefits of using software to design filters is that calculating the impedance is part of the game, part of the output. And you can keep a wary eye on the impedance while you're tinkering with the SPL response, which is something I've fully taken advantage of over the years. Moya, the base array of Moya is, it's basically a 4M system, dips to, I think it's 2.8. It's a lowish impedance system, but it's
tough but manageable for
it's
a competent
absolutely
amplifier.
manageable. The phase angle is all reasonable.
Yes.
I think it's plus or minus 40 degrees or something like that. So I think it is an important thing that the speaker designer should, as I say, keep an eye on the Z. I know that there are some relatively simple tricks that you can use to help with that aspect, and I know that because of the obsession that some manufacturers have with simplicity, which I kind of get, but sometimes just adding 3 components can really help give an ear load for the amplifier, and it's.
So, my take on the Moyas, a magnificent sounding speaker that speaks in a slightly different voice and a different perspective from the Gia Spirit, but equally convincing. If you're an upper crust, top tier audiophile with a deep pocket and a good investor and a fat listening room, by all means, you should hear this speaker.
Sorry, can I just interject there? It's a
Absolutely.
really important thing here. You do not need a ballroom to enjoy the sound of Moya. I was when we launched the first launch event was literally in a ballroom. I'm pleased to say that Moya was perfectly capable of filling the space with ample sound. But it's equally important to understand that you can actually use Moya in I don't know, what was the size you said? 22 by.
in my room.
20 by 25. Oh, that's even your rooms rather.
Would they work well in the
unnecessarily.
studio space upstairs?
Up there. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
You don't-
absolutely. And that's 17 by 24. So,
and even that's way big enough to house the Moya.
You don't need a massive room for them.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So, listen, Maurice, I really appreciate you
Bill, it was
appearing
my-
on the channel,
it was my
having
pleasure.
you back up here.
It's good to be back in beautiful New Jersey. I haven't been in many years, and it's always a pleasure.
It's always great to spend time with you.
Lawrence, a pleasure.
It's absolutely great to
to meet you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Good on you.
Cheers, everyone.
Take care.